I'm going to do sort of a rapid fire workshop focusing on a range of the issues associated with virtual work, and I'll talk a little bit about that context. So I do want to throw in one commercial, though. I really appreciate Enrique taking so much of this online. I know this is a challenging time for many innovators that are used to doing conferences and in-person events, and I just want to encourage you as much as possible to support those innovators who have had to move online and yet are still providing such great value to these global audiences. They're all trying to figure out the business model as we unbundle work in a blindingly short period of time. And I urge you to support them in any way that you can, because this is the brave new world that we've inherited, and it's very important to support those who are helping all of us to remain connected. So speaking of remaining connected, I think we're all pretty clear that we went from a world in which the friction to access to other human beings in person was relatively low. We were tremendously globally connected, and along came a virus, and suddenly we found ourselves highly disconnected. As a matter of fact, I just heard about a 300,000 person company based in the US that has gone on to a 95% remote model. Just imagining the scale of that process of helping all those human beings to continue to collaborate together is just daunting. But I want to talk about some of the themes and techniques that we're seeing that have been effective in helping people to try to navigate that, and maybe some of the indicators for the ways that especially HR leaders can look at the near-term, more tactical kinds of things that need to be done, but also see this as an opportunity, as I think has been attributed to Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I want to encourage some longer term thinking. My friend John Hagel at Deloitte Center for the Edge calls this zoom in and zoom out. What can we do to focus on the problems directly in front of us? And then how can we also think of ways to be able to step back? And so I want to run through some of the themes that we've seen in talking to a range of business and HR leaders, and distill those down. For those of you who may have heard some of my previous talks, I'm going to just hit a couple of those key points just to sort of refresh your memory and put those into this context of how we think about more distributed work. So I call this period that we're going through the Great Reset. I posted an article on techonomy.com last week. I've had a lot of conversation about this with a range of innovators on LinkedIn. And I believe that beyond just the part of this that we're talking about in terms of human work, we're finding that it isn't just a pause in human history. It's not just a time where we're just sort of stopping and, sure, it's an opportunity for introspection, but we're actually accelerating a variety of the things that were already happening related to work and organizations. And I think we're going to come out of this very different. And there's obviously lots of discussion about just how different we'll be. What are the ways that we will be functioning differently as human beings and collaborating together? What remains after all of this? But I do believe that we've got a number of opportunities, and they're just guaranteed. We've exposed ourselves to a whole bunch of different ways of working, and it's pretty much guaranteed we're going to be doing those things. So for instance, telemedicine, we're going to be doing a lot more telemedicine. That's just going to happen. You're going to probably talk to your doctor virtually before you're going to see your doctor in person, unless it's an emergency. And so these kinds of things are reshaping the way that we work and the way we interact with each other in real time. So I urge you to check out that article on Techonomy or on my LinkedIn feed. But it's clear that suddenly, as we've hit the reset button, that it's creating one of the largest experiments in human history in terms of figuring out new ways to be able to work together. I want to talk about sort of some of those themes. So a number of my colleagues, you would imagine as being the chair for the future of work with Singularity University, which is a think tank based in Silicon Valley, but has a global community of hundreds of thousands of people focused on building a positive future. Many of my colleagues in the world, they say, "Oh, the future of work is here." Well, I say, "Well, some of the future of work is here." there's things that we've been doing in the past that we are sort of going through a reevaluation of, and in real time because we have to, And so just a couple of things we might want to reevaluate: commutes and massive cubicle farms. I mean, these might have been a good idea as we shifted from agriculture to industrial models to try to figure out ways to be able to do work at scale, especially on factory floors. I don't know if this is the best way that humans do their work. I mean, there's lots of benefits towards having people in the mothership and aggregated and physically proximate. There's tons of benefits, but I don't know if that actually works in all cases at scale, and I certainly don't believe it works in all contexts. That is, there are plenty of contexts where it's actually very useful to be able to help break up the way that we approach how humans work with each other, especially how they're together. So what's going to come out of this is, I think a set of new behaviors. And as my old friend Clay Shirky is fond of saying, revolution doesn't happen when society adopts new technology. It happens when it adopts new behavior. And so we're going to behave differently. We're going from this sort of proximate team, everybody can be seated in the same room, to far more split up work. And how we do that and how well we do that is going to be one of our greatest challenges and opportunities. And of course, there are many organizations that have been doing this for quite some time. They've got lots of practices, and others for whom this is suddenly a very, very disruptive reset. And they're having to adapt very quickly. So what do we call this? We label for this talk, we called it virtual work, but some call it remote work. I don't know if it's virtual work in the same way that it's like virtual reality, it's fake reality. Well, I don't think virtual work is supposed to be fake work. So remote maybe is a little better because at least we're separate from each other, but then it sounds remote, like you're really disconnected. And so my friend John O'Doin, who wrote the book Distributed Teams, which I'll talk about, he calls it distributed. I think that's one we should try to embrace. So, but if we're going to talk about virtual, remote, or distributed work, just to refresh your memory, if you've seen this before, I say that work is basically just three things. It's on your right. It's a problem to be solved. How do we solve problems? We perform tasks. How do we perform tasks? We use our human skills, and there are knowledges, bodies of information, and then there are what are called transferable skills, or unfortunately, people often call these hard and soft skills, but basically they're knowledges and transferable skills. So we apply our skills to perform tasks, to solve problems, and then we aggregate our tasks together. We call them processes, and then we fall in love with our processes, and we kind of forget the problems that we were trying to solve. So that's sort of the basic model of work. And then we've sort of built all these things, constructs around them, including things called jobs. So speaking of a job, my father, who was a recovering minister, ended up writing a book for ministers and who were themselves being laid off, and then eventually became the world's career manual, a book known as What Color Is Your Parachute. He sort of distilled a job down into 7 characteristics. Those skills and knowledges that I was talking about, but also people. The kinds of people you feel you are best optimized to work around, the kinds of workplace characteristics, where you are geographically, how you're compensated, and then center the target purpose. And what's happening now in a world of unbundling is that all of those different components are being split apart by a variety of innovators. We can find online courses, we can find gig and remote workers on work platforms and so on. And so there's a range of innovators that are each trying to sort of tease apart that model. And then when we talk about especially distributed work, it affects the people that we work with. It affects our workplace because now our workplace is our home. I actually talked to one executive from a company, did an interview with him the other day, and he had one of the Zoom virtual backgrounds on. I said, well, where are you? He said, well, my kids took over my office and I'm actually in the master bathroom. So the workplace is now some part of our homes, and then obviously geography. We split up geography. So how do we sort of think of that in terms of a spectrum of how proximate we are with each other versus how separate? Well, the folks at Buffer they sort of give 5 use cases. They say, well, there's this office-based thing, but then you might give workers a chance to also be home. And then that worker could be remote, and you all might be in the same time zone. Well, maybe you got a bunch of people that are in different time zones, and then, oh, then let's throw nomads into the mix. And so all of that creates a pretty complicated landscape if you've got essentially a bunch of humans in motion. So you can imagine in recent weeks, I've talked to a range of HR leaders and business leaders and sort of tried to distill down what they talk about in terms of how they're trying to deal with more virtualized work. And I would group them into 4 different categories. And since it's a stack, we'll start with the bottom, but it's tools, process, culture, and alignment. And so, and I'm going to walk through each of those very quickly because we've got limited time, but obviously recording for this will be available in the future. So let's focus first on the tools. So I break the tools down into sort of 3 categories. There's the baseline connectivity, which is if your remote workers simply can't get online, then you got a problem. We've been here in California, a number of school districts have found that between 20 to 40% of their students simply don't have access to regular connectivity, and they're having to literally go sit outside a library or Starbucks to try to submit their homework. And of course, if you've got a lot of distributed workers, and especially if you're working with an NGO or you've got workers that are in developing economies, connectivity can be really flaky and really variable. And so your IT department's just got to figure out, how do you get that baseline connectivity? Because otherwise the rest of the work is hard. And then the tools tend to separate into real-time and sequential, or what's often called asynchronous. So synchronous, we got to be seeing each other, interacting with each other in real time. And so you've got tools like obviously Zoom, Skype, and others, so we can see each other. You've got real-time collaboration tools, everything from Google Docs to Microsoft Teams, and then coordination tools, the Jiras and Asanas of the world. And then there's the sequential, where we don't have to communicate in real time. And obviously that's more like Slack. And then we've got collaboration tools where we can be working sequentially. And then same coordination tools can often be used sequentially as well. But it's really HR's challenge to figure out how to be working with IT to understand the use cases, the most common use cases for the ways in which workers are collaborating, in the ways in which each individual is accomplishing their work. And it is going to be a constant adaptation to ensure that we've got the right tools, both for real-time and sequential, and that we're approaching this thinking about them as enablers. It's always around trying to make sure we really understand the decision-making processes, the work processes, and helping workers to be able to adapt to those tools. And of course, standardization of these tools is a big question for many organizations now, because a lot of this sort of, bring your own device, bring your own software mentality of a lot of IT departments has led to this period where there's a lot of innovation, lots of different groups using lots of different tools, then eventually IT standardizes. It's very important during these times to figure out how you can try to move that process forward so you get greater standardization. So beyond the tools, we're moving up the stack. Well, now it's process. So I've mentioned, obviously, it's our human skills applied to tasks to solve problems, and the tasks are basically just a set of processes. And so how do we think about those? Well, I think of them as a set of sort of fundamental processes related to crisis response. And when you talk to a range of organizations, some felt that they were really prepared. They typically are in a tornado zone or a flood zone, earthquake zone, or hurricane zone, and they at least had some disaster preparedness and response processes that they could kick in. And they had practiced some of them so that employees were ready, and others, absolutely not. Like, oh yeah, we talked about this stuff, but we had no idea. And of course, because of the uncertainty of pandemic response and not knowing how we're going to turn the lights back on, or when, or just how much lights will come on at any one point and where, and then what travel is going to look like, it's going to be very, very messy. So if you read this piece on the Great Reset, I talk about some of those challenges and opportunities. But then, of course, there's practices. And if I can point to any of the sort of distilling of practices we see that have been especially effective, it's problem centricity. So how do you focus specifically on the problems that workers are delivering? how can you give people the context in which they can continually be helped to hone their effectiveness? So what are the deliverables? What are the kinds of outcomes that they're driving towards? How can you understand on any particular team, how especially does HR get a sense of how people are doing? The people that are doing really, really well, you're going to always have standard distribution, a whole bunch of people that are thriving and adapting, and then a whole bunch of people that aren't. And how do you get them to put up their hands or have processes to be able to identify the ones who are actually having challenges in being able to follow through on the practices of the organization and getting their work done? And I think what we're doing is we're running one of the biggest trust experiments in the history of humans. A lot of companies that basically had killed work at home processes are now suddenly have to make them all work. And I think we're all going to emerge from this realizing, well, actually, it is about trust. It is about creating the kinds of support and mechanisms that allow workers to be able to do effective work, no matter where they are. And I think this massive trust experiment is hopefully going to result in some of these practices that will last. No, I'm running through these quickly, but obviously these are all issues that many of you are dealing with in your own organizations. What I'm trying to do is distill it down to some of the things where we've seen, we call our initiatives related to the future of work fulcrum. Like, where can you put the lever to have the biggest impact? So obviously culture. How do we think about that? Well, I tend to focus very heavily on the anchoring in teams. Well, what's a team? Stephanie Zombeck at the Blum Center, she's written, she says, sort of 3 basic deliverables for a team: common purpose, coordinated effort, and they're accountable for results. And especially with accountability, they're accountable to each other. That is, they each have agreements between them. And whenever some member of the team is in a challenging situation where they can't deliver what they've been accountable for, then the team actually steps in to help them do that. Well, in the world of COVID-19 and in the Great Reset, I say, well, there's another skill set I want a team to have, and that's the ability to dynamically bind around problems. If you had a team that was used to working in person, where they could see each other every single day, and suddenly now they've got all these additional problems of how they're going to coordinate, or in this era, suddenly there's a whole bunch of new problems that they have to deal with that they just never had to even think about before. They've got to be able to dynamically bind around them. That is, they need processes by which they can figure out what the problem actually is. They can figure out what stakeholders they need to have involved in being able to determine problem solutions. They need to be rapidly able to design solutions and so on. And they need to probably do that for multiple problems simultaneously. So these are some of the things that we point to practices that we point to try to really reinforce that culture. So again, problem centricity. How can we help the manager to go from being the one who thinks they have to have all the answers to the one who can simply ask the right questions and help the team to become more problem-centric and solution-centric itself? I think we are going to rethink trust. I think we are going to rethink location. I think we are going to want to incorporate more of an understanding of what humans go through in their lives. If your kid's sick, then the team needs to be able to adjust. You may not be able to be on site, and we have to trust that worker that the work will still get done. There are exponential technologies I really haven't even talked about that can actually help tremendously in helping robotic process automation and ways that we can help people to actually free up workers so that they have less of the mundane work. Hopefully that frees them up to do more of the work of tomorrow and doesn't free them up for unemployment. So I encourage HR to be thinking about all the ways to maintain employment in this era. And then finally, train for pace. And I've written a lot about this, but basically I say we want problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. So again, problem centricity, we've got to train people to be adaptive because obviously the organizations that have been able to deal the best with the COVID-19 era and the Great Reset have been the ones that actually practiced adaptivity and encouraged individuals to continually be adaptive. Creative mentality, that's what's going to keep us ahead of robots and software. And then with empathy, we have to have empathy for each other as teammates, but we also have to have empathy for our customers, empathy for our partners, and so on, in trying to continually figure out how to solve the problems of, as my friend Charlene Lee says, the customer of tomorrow. So finally, alignment. And I'm short on time. I won't be able to really delve all that much into it, but let me tell you why alignment is important. So I often say that an organization, the traditional organization, is a box. There's abundance outside the box, as my friend Peter Demonitz calls it. There's lots of people that want work, have skills, but there's scarcity inside the box. There's only so many roles that people can have. There's only so many jobs. And how do we structure those jobs? Oh, we stick them in hierarchies. And so what's happening, though, is if you think about the problems that the organization needs to continually solve, there's a range of problem solvers. There's lots and lots of different use cases for work, everything from using contractors, consultants, subcontractors, part-timers, to actually leveraging your customers, crowdsourcing solutions, leveraging online communities. Even your former employees are part of your, what I call the network. And so that box is no longer sufficient. We need to have the ways that we are able to incorporate leveraging the skills of a wide range of humans, but we have to have processes in place by which we continually align. And I've written a lot about this. I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning, things courses like training adaptive workers and training adaptive managers. But I continually come back to the alignment processes. What are the goals that the organization is trying to accomplish? How is it that each person that is trying to do work that solves problems for the organization, what are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? And then how are those connected? And how is that connectivity constantly updated on an ongoing basis? How do you know what the challenges of the organization are and the ways in which the organization is going to be able to continually align the people who are solving the problems of the organization? How do they know about the problems that each other are solving? And I point to tools like Asana. Obviously, when it's technology development focused processes, then maybe Jira, Atlassian is more commonly used. But how can you continually help every worker in the company to know about the work of the organization? And the exercise I always say is, well, what if you could stop 5 employees at different times? Well, you can't stop them in a hallway nowadays, but you could ping them on a Skype call and say, what do you think the top 3 goals of the organization are? And what are your top 3 goals? And how do your goals map to those organizational goals? And I'm going to tell you, in many organizations, you're going to find either lots of different answers or no answers. And so, well, how do you do that? Well, there's a bunch of processes that I point to, but and I call this the network, capital N, capital W. It has to be inclusive processes. It has to. You can't just think about that. There's only certain people that are included in this process. You've got to make sure that you've got a very broad and I know one company that when they do their twice weekly communications from the CEO, they don't use actually Skype or Zoom because they've got some workers in some areas where the connectivity is non-existent, but they want to be inclusive. So they want everybody to be aligned with what the CEO says the goals of the organization are, but they don't want to leave anybody out. So they actually only do it by audio so that everybody can participate in real time. I think there are practices that we're going to have where we're going to actually want to build out this network. We're going to want to hire people in more distributed places and leave them in place. We're going to want to hire more traditional backgrounds. And then we're going to need to continually align. We're going to need the processes by which organizations are dedicated to processes to ensure that everybody understands the goals of the organization. Everybody, whether you're using OKRs or other processes to be able to make those explicit, but they're constantly using their understanding of what the organization needs to manage their own, what I call portfolios of work, and they're continually doing that at the team level. So how can we step back then and think about I mentioned at the beginning, zoom in. Now let's zoom out. We're going to hit this point where the lights are going to come back on, but they're probably going to come back on in fits and starts. So as hard as it is with the challenges that we've all got right in front of us, what I'm going to suggest is 2 questions to ask yourself. The first one is, in 10 years, what are we going to wish we had done today? Like, what practices will we wish we had put in place? How would we wish that we had tried to maintain employment for as many people as possible on the payroll? What were the steps that we felt that we really should have taken to be able to ensure that we were helping to prepare people for the next big reset. And then if you're successful, how would you know? What are the metrics by which you would judge those processes that you would put in place? If I could wave my magic wand, I would say something that would be really helpful, I think, for every organization is to step back and look at, we talk a lot about skill sets and that sort of thing, is to look at both the yin and the yang of both mindset and skill set. How can we create organizations where we are continually helping workers to be able to develop the mindset that they need to become adaptive problem solvers, but then giving them the skill set so that they can continually do that? And I'm going to guarantee you that's going to mean lots more training. I'm going to guarantee you that's going to mean a mentality around lifelong working. Lifelong learning. Sorry. If you look at Novartis, look at what they're doing with their lifelong learning initiative. 100,000 person organization dedicated to lifelong learning, throughout the organization. And oh, by the way, they also have a process called unbossing, where they're trying to help encourage much more of that sort of guide on the side behavior that I was talking about. But it's also about skill set. It's giving people the tools that they need, the training that they need, so that they are continually able to solve the problems of tomorrow. They are themselves learning and adaptive human beings that always have a North Star or a Southern Cross that they're focusing on. And Carol Dweck, of course, has written the book on this, talking about growth and fixed mindsets. But I believe that this is going to be something that HR professionals are going to have to focus on deeply. And then eventually we are going to be better connected. We are going to find out that we have become far more connected as humans, not just within our own organizations, but across the planet, dealing with so many of the same challenges. And I feel that what we're learning here is we're actually building in real time as we figure out how to manage virtual work. We're actually building a better and more virtually connected world. So resources, again, you can look back at the recording, but resources, there are books, distributed teams, and remote, focused on the mechanics. Pluralsight has posted a remote work guide, and as well as a free course on making work from home work. I mentioned Carol's book, Mindset, and then I've got, as I mentioned, 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning. So, and if you want resources, I'm sure you know, but SHRM has a ton of policy and practice guidelines on their site. And then all the links to all the things that I just mentioned are on my site, gbolles.com. So.